Picture this: you're standing in your driveway at 6 a.m., watching a security camera footage that shows your neighbor Karen deliberately kicking over your trash can for the 20th time this month. But what she doesn't know is that you've just installed something that's about to change everything. Something she definitely didn't see coming. Something that will make her think twice before ever touching your property again. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how this all started, and trust me, you're going to want to hear every single detail of what happened next. But before we dive into this wild story, if you're someone who loves tales about standing up to difficult neighbors and finding creative solutions to everyday problems, make sure to hit that subscribe button. You're going to love the stories I share here, and trust me, this one is just getting started. It all began on a sunny Tuesday morning in Willowbrook, a quiet suburban neighborhood where the houses looked like they belonged in a magazine and the lawns were perfectly manicured. My name is Jake, and I had just moved into my dream home on Maple Street with my wife Sarah and our 8-year-old daughter Emma. We thought we had found paradise. The house was everything we had ever wanted. A beautiful 2-story colonial with a white picket fence, a big backyard where Emma could play, and neighbors who waved when they saw us. For the first month, everything was perfect. Sarah would tend to her flower garden in the mornings while I got ready for work, and Emma would ride her bike up and down the sidewalk, making friends with other kids in the neighborhood. Our next-door neighbor was a woman named Karen Mitchell. She was probably in her late 50s, with short blonde hair that was always perfectly styled, and she wore the kind of clothes that looked expensive but not quite fashionable. At first, she seemed friendly enough. She brought us a casserole on our first day and welcomed us to the neighborhood with a big smile. "Welcome to Willowbrook," she had said, standing at our front door with a covered dish. "I'm Karen, your next-door neighbor. I've lived here for 15 years, and I just know you're going to love it. We have such a wonderful community here." Sarah and I were grateful for the warm welcome. We invited her in for coffee, and she told us all about the neighborhood. She explained how the homeowners association worked, pointed out which neighbors were the friendliest, and even offered to introduce us to some of the other families on the street. But as the weeks went by, we started to notice something strange about Karen. She had very strong opinions about how things should be done in the neighborhood, and she wasn't shy about sharing them. She would walk around the streets in the evening, looking at everyone's yards and houses like she was some kind of inspector. The first sign of trouble came during our second week in the house. I had put our trash cans out the night before pickup day, just like we always did at our old house. The next morning, I woke up to find both cans knocked over, with garbage scattered all across our driveway and front yard. "That's weird," I said to Sarah as we cleaned up the mess. "Maybe it was a raccoon or something." Sarah nodded, but she looked concerned. "Maybe we should put them out in the morning instead," she suggested. So the next week, I put the trash cans out early in the morning before I left for work. But when I came home that evening, Sarah met me at the door with a frustrated expression. "The trash cans got knocked over again," she said. "And this time, I saw who did it." My heart sank. "Please don't tell me it was Karen." Sarah nodded slowly. "I was in the kitchen around noon when I heard a loud crash. I looked out the window and saw her walking away from our driveway. Our trash can was on its side, and garbage was everywhere. I couldn't believe it. Why would our neighbor, who had seemed so friendly, deliberately knock over our trash cans? It didn't make any sense." "Maybe it was an accident," I said, trying to give her the benefit of the doubt. "Maybe she was walking by and accidentally bumped into it." But deep down, I had a feeling it wasn't an accident. There was something about the way Sarah described Karen walking away that made it sound intentional. The next week, I decided to test my theory. I set up our old security camera to point toward the street where we kept our trash cans. It was just a basic camera that we had used at our previous house, but it would be enough to see what was happening. Wednesday morning came, and I put the trash cans out as usual. Then I went to work, checking the camera feed on my phone throughout the day. Around 11 a.m., I saw Karen walk out of her house and head straight toward our property. She looked around to make sure no one was watching, then walked right up to our trash can and gave it a hard kick. The can toppled over, sending garbage spilling across our driveway. Karen looked satisfied with her work and calmly walked back to her house like nothing had happened. I was furious. Not only was she deliberately vandalizing our property, but she was also creating a mess that we had to clean up every week. And for what? What could we possibly have done to make her so angry? That evening, I showed the footage to Sarah. She was just as upset as I was. We need to confront her about this, Sarah said. This is harassment, Jake. She can't just keep doing this to us. I agreed, but I wanted to handle it diplomatically. After all, we were going to be neighbors for a long time, and I didn't want to start a war over trash cans. The next morning, I walked over to Karen's house and knocked on her door. When she answered, she had that same friendly smile she had worn when she first welcomed us to the neighborhood. "Oh, hi Jake," she said cheerfully. "How are you settling in?" "Actually, Karen, that's what I wanted to talk to you about," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and respectful. "We've been having some trouble with our trash cans getting knocked over, and I have security footage that shows you kicking them over. I was wondering if we could talk about why that's happening." Karen's friendly expression immediately changed. Her smile disappeared, and her eyes narrowed. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said coldly. "And I resent the accusation." "I have it on video, Karen," I said, showing her my phone. "Look, I'm not trying to start a fight. I just want to understand what's going on so we can work this out." Karen looked at the video footage, and I could see her face getting redder by the second. But instead of apologizing or explaining herself, she got defensive. "You know what?" she said, crossing her arms. "Maybe if you followed the HOA rules properly, this wouldn't be a problem." I was confused. "What HOA rules?" "I've read through all the documents, and I don't see anything about trash cans. The trash cans are supposed to be put out on the morning of pickup, not the night before," she said smugly. "And they're supposed to be positioned exactly 3 feet from the curb, with the handles facing the street. You've been putting them out wrong every single week." I stared at her in disbelief. "So you've been knocking them over to teach me a lesson?" "I've been enforcing the community standards," she said. "As a longtime resident and member of the HOA board, it's my responsibility to make sure everyone follows the rules." Now I was getting angry. "Karen, even if that's true, you can't just vandalize people's property. If there's a problem with how I'm putting out my trash, you should have talked to me about it, not knocked over my cans and made a mess." I tried to be nice about it, she said, though I couldn't remember her ever mentioning trash cans during our previous conversations. But some people only learn the hard way. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Look, can you just show me exactly how you want the cans positioned? I'm happy to follow the rules if you explain them to me." Karen seemed pleased that I was backing down. "Fine," she said. "The cans need to be exactly 3 feet from the curb, with the wheels facing your house and the handles facing the street. They go out at 6 a.m. on pickup day, not the night before. And they need to be brought back in within 2 hours of pickup." I made mental notes of all her requirements. Some of them seemed reasonable, but others seemed unnecessarily specific. Still, if it would stop her from knocking over our trash cans, I was willing to try. "Okay," I said. "I'll make sure to follow those rules from now on. But in return, I need you to promise that you'll stop knocking over our cans. If there's ever a problem in the future, just come talk to me directly." Karen nodded, but something in her expression told me this wasn't over. "We'll see," she said, and closed the door. The next week, I followed Karen's rules exactly. I measured 3 feet from the curb, positioned the handles correctly, and put the cans out at precisely 6 a.m. I even set an alarm to make sure I brought them back in within 2 hours of pickup. For a moment, I thought our problems were solved. The trash cans stayed upright, and Karen didn't bother us. But then, 3 weeks later, something happened that made me realize Karen's war on our trash cans was just the beginning of a much bigger problem. I was working in my home office when I heard Emma crying outside. I rushed to the window and saw her standing in our front yard, tears streaming down her face. Her bike was lying on its side next to her, and Karen was standing nearby with her arms crossed, looking stern. I ran outside to see what was wrong. "Emma, what happened, sweetheart?" I asked, kneeling down next to my daughter. Emma sniffled, pointing at Karen. "She said I can't ride my bike on the sidewalk anymore because I'm going too fast and it's dangerous." I looked up at Karen. "Is that true?" "Children are supposed to ride their bikes in the street or in their own driveways," Karen said matter-of-factly. "The sidewalks are for walking. It's in the HOA rules." I felt my anger rising again. Emma was 8 years old. There was no way I was going to let her ride her bike in the street where cars could hit her. "Karen, she's a child," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "The sidewalk is the safest place for her to ride." "Rules are rules," Karen replied. "If everyone just did whatever they wanted, this neighborhood would fall apart." That's when I realized that Karen wasn't just obsessed with trash cans. She was obsessed with controlling everything and everyone in the neighborhood. And for some reason, she had decided that our family was her primary target. But what happened next would make the trash can incident look like a minor inconvenience. Because Karen was about to cross a line that would change everything between us forever, and lead me to install something she definitely didn't see coming. I was about to discover just how far Karen was willing to go to make our lives miserable, and it was going to push me to my absolute breaking point. What she did next was so outrageous, so completely over the line, that it would force me to take action that would shock everyone in the neighborhood. But that's exactly when things got really interesting. And if you're enjoying this story so far and want to see how I finally got my revenge on HOA Karen, make sure you're subscribed because what happens next is going to blow your mind. Trust me, you don't want to miss what I had planned for her. The very next morning after Karen confronted Emma about her bike, I woke up to something that made my blood boil. I was getting ready for work when Sarah called me to the front window with urgency in her voice. "Jake, you need to see this right now," she said, and I could tell from her tone that something was seriously wrong. I rushed to the window and couldn't believe what I was seeing. There, right in the middle of our beautiful front lawn, was a bright orange violation notice stuck into the ground like a flag. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that our sprinkler system was running, and Karen was standing at the edge of our property with her phone out, taking pictures of our wet driveway. I threw on my shoes and ran outside, my heart pounding with anger. "What is this?" I demanded, pointing at the orange notice. Karen looked up from her phone with a satisfied smirk. "That's a violation notice for excessive water usage," she said calmly. "Your sprinklers have been running for more than the 15-minute maximum allowed by the HOA water conservation policy." I stared at her in disbelief. 15 minutes. Karen, it takes at least 20 minutes to properly water a lawn this size. And since when is there a water conservation policy? Since the board meeting last month, she replied, still taking pictures. All residents were notified by email. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my emails. There was nothing from the HOA about any water restrictions. I never got any email about this. Karen shrugged. "Maybe you should check your spam folder. Ignorance of the rules isn't an excuse." That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Karen wasn't just taking pictures of our driveway. She was documenting everything about our property. Our lawn, our flower beds, the way our garden hose was coiled, even the position of our doormat. "Why are you taking pictures of our house?" I asked. "Documentation," she said simply. "For the HOA file. We need to keep track of all violations so we can determine if a property is being properly maintained according to community standards." I felt like I was in some kind of nightmare. This woman was literally stalking our property, looking for any excuse to write us up for violations. And the scariest part was that she seemed to think she had every right to do it. "Karen, this is harassment," I said firmly. "You can't just stand on our property taking pictures and making up rules." "I'm not on your property," she said, taking a step back. "I'm on the public sidewalk, which gives me every right to document violations visible from the street. And I'm not making up rules. I'm enforcing existing HOA policies that you apparently haven't bothered to read." She held up a thick binder that I hadn't noticed before. "This contains every rule and regulation for Willowbrook Estates. Maybe you should have requested a copy when you moved in. I was so frustrated I could barely speak. Fine, I said. I want a copy of that binder. I want to see every single rule you're talking about. Karen smiled like she had been waiting for me to ask. Of course. I'll have my assistant make you a copy. There's a small fee for printing and binding, though. $50 should cover it. $50. For a copy of rules that should have been given to us when we bought the house. But at this point, I was willing to pay anything to understand what we were dealing with. Fine, I said. When can I get it? I'll have it ready by Friday, Karen said, closing her binder. In the meantime, I suggest you turn off those sprinklers before you rack up more violations. She walked away, leaving me standing in my wet driveway, staring at the orange violation notice. I pulled it out of the ground and read it carefully. It was printed on official-looking paper with the HOA letterhead, and it threatened a $50 fine if the violation wasn't corrected within 48 hours. When I got inside, Sarah was waiting by the door with a cup of coffee and a worried expression. What did she say? Sarah asked. I showed her the violation notice and explained about the binder of rules. Sarah shook her head in disbelief. This is getting out of hand, Jake. She's harassing us, and now she's trying to fine us for watering our lawn. What's next? I wish I had known the answer to that question, because what Karen did over the next few days was beyond anything I could have imagined. That afternoon, I came home from work to find Emma sitting on our front steps, looking sad and confused. Hey, sweetheart, I said, sitting down next to her. What's wrong? Daddy, the mean lady came back, Emma said quietly. She told me I'm not allowed to draw with chalk on our driveway anymore because it's defacing HOA property. My heart sank. Emma loved drawing with sidewalk chalk. She would spend hours creating colorful pictures of flowers, rainbows, and our family. It was one of her favorite activities, and it was completely harmless. Did she say anything else? I asked gently. Emma nodded. She said if I keep doing it, we might have to move away. That was the last straw. Karen had crossed the line from being a difficult neighbor to frightening my 8-year-old daughter. No adult should ever threaten a child like that, especially over something as innocent as sidewalk chalk. I knocked on Karen's door that evening, and this time I wasn't going to be polite. Karen, we need to talk, I said when she answered. Oh, hello Jake, she said with fake sweetness. I hope you got my message about the chalk situation. You threatened my daughter, I said, trying to keep my voice calm but firm. You told an 8-year-old that we might have to move if she keeps drawing with chalk. That is completely unacceptable. Karen's expression didn't change. I simply informed her of the potential consequences of repeated violations. Children need to learn that actions have results. She's 8 years old, Karen. And drawing with chalk on our own driveway isn't a violation of anything. It washes away with the first rain. Actually, it is a violation, Karen said, pulling out her ever-present binder. Section 4.7 of the Community Guidelines states that residents may not alter the appearance of any visible surfaces without prior approval from the Architectural Review Committee. I stared at her. You're saying that a child drawing temporary pictures with washable chalk requires approval from a committee? That's correct, she said. The rule is designed to maintain property values and community aesthetics. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Karen, you're talking about a little girl drawing flowers on her own driveway. How does that hurt property values? It sets a precedent, she explained matter-of-factly. If we allow one child to draw on driveways, soon every child will be doing it. Then it's graffiti, then it's permanent decorations, and before you know it, the neighborhood looks like a carnival. The conversation was getting more surreal by the minute. Karen seemed to genuinely believe that my daughter's chalk drawings were the first step toward neighborhood chaos. Look, I said, taking a deep breath. I understand that you care about the neighborhood. But you need to stop harassing my family. We're trying to follow the rules, but you're making it impossible for us to live normal lives. Karen tilted her head like she was confused. I'm not harassing anyone. I'm simply doing my job as an HOA board member. If you have a problem with the rules, you're welcome to attend the next board meeting and voice your concerns. When is the next board meeting? I asked. The third Thursday of every month at 7 p.m. in the community center, she said. Though I should warn you, changing established rules requires a majority vote from homeowners, and most people here appreciate the high standards we maintain. As I walked back to my house, I felt defeated. Karen had an answer for everything, and she was hiding behind official rules and procedures. But I was determined to find a way to stop her from tormenting my family. The next few days were relatively quiet, and I started to hope that maybe our conversation had gotten through to her. Emma was still nervous about playing outside, but at least Karen wasn't actively bothering us. Then came Friday morning, and everything changed again. I was drinking my coffee and checking emails when I heard a commotion outside. Through the window, I saw a white truck parked in front of our house, and two men in uniforms were walking around our property with clipboards. I went outside to see what was happening. "Excuse me," I called to the men. "Can I help you with something?" One of the men looked up from his clipboard. "Are you the homeowner?" "Yes, I'm Jake Miller." "We're from the County Code Enforcement Office," he said. "We received a complaint about possible violations on this property, and we're here to conduct an inspection." My heart started racing. What kind of violations? The man consulted his clipboard. "Let's see, improper trash can placement, excessive water usage, unauthorized modifications to the driveway surface, and failure to maintain landscaping standards." I couldn't believe it. Karen had actually called the county to report us for code violations. She had escalated our neighborhood dispute to involve government officials. "Sir, I can assure you that we haven't violated any county codes," I said. "Our trash cans are placed according to HOA guidelines, our water usage is normal, we haven't modified our driveway, and our landscaping is well maintained." The inspector looked sympathetic. "I'm sure you're right, sir. Unfortunately, we have to follow up on all complaints. It shouldn't take long." For the next hour, I watched as the two inspectors examined every inch of our property. They measured the distance from our trash cans to the curb, checked our sprinkler system, and even took photos of Emma's faded chalk drawings. Meanwhile, I noticed Karen standing in her front yard, pretending to tend to her flower bed while obviously watching the whole process. Finally, the inspectors came back to talk to me. "Good news, Mr. Miller," the first inspector said. "We didn't find any county code violations. Your property meets all municipal standards." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "Thank you. I appreciate you being thorough." "No problem," he said. "Just so you know, this is the third complaint we've received about properties in this neighborhood in the past month. Someone seems to be very vigilant about code enforcement." After the inspectors left, I was angrier than I had ever been. Karen had wasted the time of county employees and put our family through unnecessary stress, all because she wanted to prove a point about HOA rules. But what really pushed me over the edge happened that same afternoon. I was working in my home office when Sarah burst through the door, holding an official-looking envelope. "Jake, you need to see this right now," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. I opened the envelope and felt my world turn upside down. It was a letter from a law firm, sent on behalf of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. The letter stated that our family had accumulated multiple violations of community guidelines and that we had 30 days to correct all issues or face legal action that could result in liens against our property. The letter listed 14 different violations, including things I had never heard of before. Apparently, our doormat was the wrong color, our garden hose was stored improperly, and our mailbox numbers were mounted at an incorrect height. But the most shocking part was at the bottom of the letter. It stated that if we continued to violate HOA rules, the association could force us to sell our house and move out of the neighborhood. I sat down heavily in my chair, staring at the letter. This wasn't just harassment anymore. Karen was literally trying to force us out of our home. "We have to fight this," Sarah said, tears in her eyes. "She can't just make up rules and threaten to take our house." I nodded, but inside I felt overwhelmed. How do you fight someone who seems to have the entire legal system on their side? How do you protect your family from a neighbor who has turned your life into a nightmare? That's when I started planning something that would change everything. Something that Karen definitely wouldn't see coming. Because I was done being the victim in this situation, and I was about to show Karen that she had messed with the wrong family. But what I was planning would require careful preparation and perfect timing. And the consequences would be bigger than anything that had happened so far. The trash can revenge I had in mind was just the beginning of a much larger plan that would teach Karen a lesson she would never forget. The next morning, I was about to put the first phase of my plan into action, and Karen had no idea what was about to hit her. If you're loving this story and want to see exactly how I got my revenge on this HOA Karen, make sure you hit that subscribe button because what happens next is going to be absolutely epic. The next morning, I stood in my garage at 5:30 a.m., putting the final touches on what I had secretly been working on for the past 2 weeks. In front of me sat what looked like an ordinary black trash can, but hidden inside was a surprise that would turn Karen's world upside down. I had installed a motion-activated camera system, a loud alarm, and something else that would catch her completely off guard. But as I wheeled it out to the curb, I had no idea that Karen was already awake and watching me from her bedroom window. Within minutes of placing the special trash can in its designated spot exactly 3 feet from the curb, I saw Karen's front door open. She was dressed in her usual morning outfit, a perfectly pressed jogging suit and pristine white sneakers, but there was something different about her today. She looked determined, almost excited, like she was about to do something she had been planning for a long time. I quickly went back inside and opened the app on my phone that connected to the hidden cameras. Sarah was already awake, making coffee in the kitchen, and she came over to watch with me. "Are you sure about this?" she asked nervously. "What if she finds out what you've done?" "She won't figure it out right away," I said, though my heart was pounding with anticipation. "And even if she does, everything I've installed is completely legal. I'm not breaking any laws or HOA rules." We watched on the phone screen as Karen casually strolled down her driveway, looking around the neighborhood like she was just taking a morning walk. But I could tell from her body language that she was heading straight for our trash can with a purpose. She approached the can slowly, glancing back toward our house to make sure no one was watching. What she didn't know was that I had positioned cameras in 3 different locations, giving me perfect views of everything she was about to do. Karen stood next to the trash can for a moment, probably checking to see if I had followed all her ridiculous positioning rules. Then, with the same casual motion I had seen her use so many times before, she lifted her foot and gave the can a hard kick. But instead of toppling over like usual, something completely unexpected happened. The moment her foot made contact with the can, a piercing alarm started blaring, so loud that it echoed through the entire neighborhood. At the same time, a bright strobe light began flashing from inside the can, and a pre-recorded message started playing at maximum volume. "Warning. Property tampering detected. Homeowner has been notified. Warning. Property tampering detected." Karen jumped back like she had been shocked by electricity. The look of confusion and panic on her face was priceless. She looked around frantically, trying to figure out where the alarm was coming from and how to make it stop. But that wasn't even the best part. As the alarm continued blaring, neighbors started coming out of their houses to see what was happening. Mrs. Peterson from across the street opened her front door in her bathrobe. The Johnson family came running out of their house, thinking there might be a fire or emergency. Even old Mr. Williams, who usually minded his own business, stepped onto his porch to investigate. And there was Karen, standing next to our screaming trash can, looking guilty as could be. The alarm was set to run for exactly 60 seconds, long enough to draw attention, but not so long that it would annoy the neighbors too much. As the sound finally stopped, an eerie silence fell over the street. "Karen?" Mrs. Peterson called out. "Is everything okay over there?" Karen's face was bright red with embarrassment. She was clearly trying to think of an explanation that would make sense, but how do you explain why you were standing next to someone's trash can when an alarm went off? I was just... Karen stammered, looking around at all the neighbors who were now staring at her. "I thought I heard something strange and I was investigating." Mr. Johnson walked across the street, looking concerned. What kind of alarm was that? I've never heard anything like it. That's when I decided to make my appearance. I opened my front door and stepped outside, acting like I had just been woken up by the commotion. What's going on out here? I called out, pretending to be confused. I heard some kind of alarm. Karen's eyes met mine, and I could see a mix of anger and fear in her expression. She knew that I knew exactly what had happened, but she couldn't prove anything. Your trash can malfunctioned, she said through gritted teeth. It started making noise for no reason. I walked over to examine the can, putting on my best confused face. That's so strange. It's just a regular trash can. I wonder what could have caused that. Mrs. Peterson was still standing in her doorway, looking suspicious. Karen, what were you doing over there when it went off? I told you, I was investigating a strange noise, Karen repeated, but her voice was getting higher and more defensive. At 6 a.m. Mr. Johnson asked. In your jogging clothes? I could see Karen getting more flustered by the second. The neighbors were starting to piece together what had really happened, and she didn't have a good explanation. Well, I jog every morning at this time, she said. And I thought I heard something suspicious, so I went to check it out. That's what good neighbors do, we look out for each other. But her explanation wasn't convincing anyone. Mrs. Peterson gave her a long, skeptical look before going back inside her house. The other neighbors gradually dispersed, but I could tell they were all talking about what they had witnessed. After everyone was gone, Karen turned to face me. Her friendly neighborhood act was completely gone now, replaced by barely controlled fury. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, she said in a low voice, but this isn't over. I'm not playing any games, Karen, I replied calmly. I'm just trying to protect my property from vandalism. If someone tries to damage my trash can, I want to know about it. You can't booby-trap your trash can, she said. That's illegal. I shook my head. There's nothing illegal about a motion-activated alarm. People use them for security all the time. If someone has legitimate business near my trash can, like the garbage collectors, they won't trigger it because they're not trying to kick it over. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She couldn't argue with my logic without admitting that she had been kicking over my trash can on purpose. This is harassment, she finally said. No, Karen, I replied, my voice getting firmer. Harassment is what you've been doing to my family for months. This is self-defense. She stormed back to her house without another word, and I couldn't help but smile as I watched her go. Phase 1 of my plan had worked perfectly. But over the next few days, I realized that embarrassing Karen in front of the neighbors had only made her more determined to get revenge on us. If I thought the alarm incident would teach her a lesson and make her leave us alone, I was completely wrong. The very next morning, I woke up to find 3 new violation notices stuck in our front yard. According to Karen's citations, our grass was too long, our car was parked at an improper angle in our driveway, and our house number was the wrong font. But that wasn't the worst part. When I went to get our mail that afternoon, I discovered that Karen had filed a formal complaint with the county health department, claiming that our trash can pose a public safety hazard because of its alarm system. 2 days later, a health inspector showed up at our door. Mr. Miller, the inspector said. I'm here about a complaint regarding a potentially dangerous device on your property. I explained the situation to the inspector, showing him the trash can and demonstrating how the alarm worked. After examining it thoroughly, he shook his head. There's nothing dangerous about this, he said. It's just a basic motion sensor with an alarm. People use these for home security all the time. Whoever filed this complaint was wasting our time. But Karen wasn't done. Over the next week, she filed complaints with the fire department, claiming our alarm was too loud, the police department, claiming it was a noise violation, and even the postal service, claiming it might interfere with mail delivery. Each time, officials came to investigate and found nothing wrong. But the constant stream of inspections and complaints was wearing on our family. Emma was getting scared every time she saw a government vehicle pull up to our house, and Sarah was becoming increasingly stressed about the whole situation. She's not going to stop, Sarah said one evening as we watched another inspector walk around our property. She's going to keep escalating until she forces us to move. I knew Sarah was right. Karen had declared war on our family, and she wasn't going to give up until she won. But what she didn't know was that I had been expecting this escalation, and I had been preparing for it. That night, after Emma was asleep, I went down to my basement workshop and started working on phase 2 of my plan. The special trash can had been just the beginning. What I was building now would be much more elaborate, and much more embarrassing for Karen. But I needed to be careful. Karen was clearly documenting everything we did, looking for any excuse to get us in trouble with the authorities or the HOA. Whatever I did next had to be completely legal and within all the rules, while still being effective at stopping her harassment. I spent 3 days researching HOA laws, property rights, and local ordinances. I read every page of the community guidelines that Karen had finally provided, for the $50 fee, of course. And I discovered something very interesting. According to the HOA rules, any resident who files more than 5 complaints per month against a single neighbor can be considered to be engaging in harassment behavior, and can be subject to sanctions by the board. Karen had filed 8 complaints against us in the past 2 weeks alone. But more importantly, I found a rule that Karen apparently didn't know about. Section 12.4 of the Community Guidelines stated that HOA board members must recuse themselves from any decisions involving properties directly adjacent to their own, due to potential conflicts of interest. Since Karen lived right next door to us, she technically wasn't supposed to be involved in any official actions against our property. Every violation notice she had issued, every fine she had assessed, and every complaint she had filed was potentially invalid. I also discovered that according to county records, the HOA hadn't held a proper board meeting in over 8 months. The water conservation policy that Karen had cited didn't exist in any official documentation. In fact, most of the rules she had been enforcing were either outdated, misinterpreted, or completely made up. Karen had been acting like she had the full authority of the HOA behind her, but in reality, she was just one neighbor with a clipboard and too much time on her hands. Armed with this information, I started preparing for the next HOA board meeting. But before I could present my case, Karen made a move that was so outrageous, so completely over the line, that it would backfire on her in ways she never could have imagined. It was a Tuesday morning when I discovered what she had done. I was getting ready for work when Sarah called me to the front door with panic in her voice. "Jake, come here right now," she said. "You're not going to believe this." I rushed to the door and looked outside. There, in the middle of our front lawn, was a large wooden sign that read, "This property under HOA investigation, multiple violations pending." My jaw dropped. Karen had actually put a shame sign on our property, like we were some kind of criminals. But what made it even worse was that she had installed it right in the middle of our prized flower garden that Sarah had spent months cultivating. The sign wasn't just embarrassing, it was destructive. Karen had dug a hole right through Sarah's prize-winning roses to install her sign post. "She destroyed my garden," Sarah said, tears starting to form in her eyes. "Jake, she killed my roses." That's when I knew that Karen had finally gone too far. She had crossed the line from harassment into vandalism and property destruction. And she was about to learn that she had picked the wrong family to mess with. Because what I was planning for her now would be so public, so humiliating, and so perfectly legal that she would regret ever knocking over our trash can in the first place. The real revenge was about to begin, and this time, the entire neighborhood was going to see exactly who Karen really was. But I needed to act fast, because Karen was clearly preparing for something even bigger. I had seen her meeting with other neighbors, showing them official-looking documents and pointing at our house. She was trying to turn the entire neighborhood against us, and if I didn't stop her soon, she might actually succeed. If you're on the edge of your seat wondering how I'm going to get Karen back for destroying our garden and humiliating us with that sign, make sure you're subscribed because what happens in the final chapter is going to be absolutely incredible. Trust me, Karen has no idea what's coming her way. The morning after Karen installed that humiliating sign in our destroyed flower garden, I put the final phase of my plan into action. What I had discovered during my research was going to expose Karen in front of the entire neighborhood in a way she never saw coming. But first, I had to document everything she had done wrong, and I mean everything. I spent the entire day going through every violation notice, every complaint, and every interaction we'd had with Karen over the past 3 months. What I found was even worse than I had imagined. Karen had been systematically violating her own HOA rules while harassing us about made-up violations. According to the community guidelines, HOA board members were required to give 72 hours written notice before conducting property inspections. Karen had never given us any notice, she just showed up whenever she wanted and started taking pictures. The guidelines also stated that violation notices could only be issued after a formal complaint was filed and reviewed by the full board. Karen had been issuing notices on her own authority, without any board approval. But the biggest discovery was in Section 8.3 of the HOA bylaws, which clearly stated that any modifications to common areas, including street-facing signage, required unanimous approval from all board members and affected homeowners. Karen's shame sign was completely illegal according to her own rules. Armed with this information, I called the HOA management company that was listed in our homeowner documents. After being transferred 3 times, I finally reached someone who could help me. "I'm sorry, Mr. Miller," the representative said after I explained the situation. "But I think there's been some confusion. The Willowbrook Estates HOA dissolved over 2 years ago due to lack of participation. There is no active homeowners association in your neighborhood." I felt like I had been hit by lightning. "What do you mean there's no HOA?" According to our records, the association couldn't maintain the required number of board members, so it was officially dissolved in March 2023. Any rules or violations being enforced would have no legal authority. This changed everything. Karen had been terrorizing our family with fake authority. She was just a regular neighbor with no special powers, pretending to represent an organization that didn't even exist anymore. But I wasn't done investigating. I called the county clerk's office to research Karen's property records, and what I found there made my jaw drop. Karen's house had been in foreclosure proceedings for the past 6 months. She was behind on her mortgage payments and was facing eviction. The stress of potentially losing her home might have explained her obsession with controlling everything else in the neighborhood, but it didn't excuse her behavior. More importantly, I discovered that Karen's house had several actual code violations that she had never addressed. Her roof had been damaged in a storm last year and never repaired, creating a potential safety hazard. Her driveway had cracks that violated county maintenance standards. And her backyard shed had been built without proper permits. Now I had everything I needed for my final plan. It was time to give Karen a taste of her own medicine, but I was going to do it in a way that would expose the truth to everyone and finally put an end to her harassment. That evening, I worked late into the night preparing what I called the Karen Documentation Project. I printed copies of every fake violation notice she had given us, along with proof that the HOA didn't exist. I gathered photos of all the actual violations on her property. And I created a timeline showing how she had escalated from knocking over trash cans to destroying our garden and installing illegal signs. The next morning, I started phase 1 of my revenge plan. I removed Karen's illegal shame sign from our property and took photos documenting the damage she had caused to our flower garden. Then I filed a formal complaint with the county about the unpermitted sign and the property damage. But that was just the warm-up. For phase 2, I created professional-looking flyers that I planned to distribute to every house in the neighborhood. The flyer was titled "Important Community Information" and contained all the facts about Karen's fake authority, the dissolved HOA, and her actual code violations. I made sure everything was factual and well documented, because I knew Karen would try to claim it was harassment. However, before I could distribute the flyers, something happened that made my revenge plan even more satisfying than I had imagined. I was in my garage, organizing my documentation, when I heard a commotion outside. Through the window, I saw a county code enforcement truck parked in front of Karen's house, and 2 inspectors were walking around her property with clipboards. Karen came running out of her house in her bathrobe, looking panicked. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "You can't just inspect my property without notice." One of the inspectors looked up from his clipboard. "Ma'am, we received multiple complaints about code violations on this property. We're required to investigate." I couldn't help but smile. Karen was getting a taste of exactly what she had put us through, except this time the complaints were about real violations, not made-up HOA rules. "This is harassment," Karen shouted, loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. "Someone is targeting me." The inspector remained calm and professional. "Ma'am, these are legitimate code enforcement issues. Your roof damage poses a potential safety hazard, and your driveway needs maintenance to meet county standards." As I watched the inspection unfold, neighbors began coming outside to see what was happening. Mrs. Peterson, Mr. Johnson, and several other families gathered on the sidewalk, whispering among themselves. That's when I decided to put Phase 3 of my plan into action. I walked over to where the neighbors were gathered, carrying copies of my documentation. "Hi everyone," I said casually. "I thought you might be interested to know what's really been going on in our neighborhood." I handed out the flyers I had prepared, explaining how Karen had been pretending to represent a non-existent HOA and harassing families with fake violations. Mrs. Peterson read through the flyer with wide eyes. "Are you saying there's no homeowners association?" "That's correct," I said. "The HOA was dissolved over 2 years ago. Karen has no authority to issue violations or enforce rules." Mr. Johnson looked shocked. "She wrote me up last month for having the wrong color mailbox. She said I could be fined $500 if I didn't change it. She made me repaint my front door," said Mrs. Chen from down the street. "She said the color wasn't approved by the architectural committee." As more neighbors shared their stories, I realized that Karen had been harassing almost everyone in the neighborhood. She had been pretending to represent the HOA to control and intimidate her neighbors for months, maybe even years. But the best part was still coming. One of the code enforcement inspectors walked over to our group. "Excuse me," he said. "Are any of you familiar with the woman who owns this property?" "That's Karen Mitchell, Mrs. Peterson said. She's been very active in neighborhood affairs." The inspector nodded. "I see. Well, I wanted to let everyone know that we found several serious violations on this property. The damaged roof could pose a danger to neighboring houses if there's a strong storm. We're going to require immediate repairs." He paused and looked at his clipboard. "We also found an unpermitted shed in the backyard, unpermitted electrical work, and a driveway that doesn't meet county standards. The total fines for these violations could exceed $3,000. The neighbors looked at each other in amazement. Karen, who had been terrorizing everyone with threats of fines and violations, was now facing thousands of dollars in real fines for actual violations. But Karen wasn't done fighting. As the inspectors finished their work and drove away, she marched over to where we were all standing. "This is all because of him," she said, pointing at me. "He's been harassing me and filing false complaints because I tried to maintain community standards." I remained calm and professional. "Karen, I think it's time everyone knew the truth about what's been happening." I pulled out my phone and opened the app that connected to my security cameras. "I have footage of you kicking over our trash can multiple times, destroying our flower garden, and installing that illegal sign on our property." Karen's face went pale. "You've been recording me?" "I've been recording my own property to document the vandalism," I said. "And I have 3 months of footage showing exactly what you've been doing." Mrs. Peterson stepped forward. "Karen, is it true that there's no HOA? Have you been making up all these rules?" Karen looked around at all the neighbors staring at her, and for the first time since I had known her, she seemed at a loss for words. "The rules, the community standards," she stammered. "Someone has to maintain order. If we don't enforce standards, property values will decline." "But you can't just make up fake authority," Mr. Johnson said. "You can't threaten people with fines and violations when you have no right to do it." That's when Karen finally snapped. All the pressure of her financial problems, the code violations, and now being exposed in front of the entire neighborhood became too much. "Fine," she shouted. "You want to know the truth?" "Yes, I've been enforcing standards because no one else will. Someone has to keep this neighborhood from falling apart. Someone has to make sure people follow the rules." "What rules?" Mrs. Chen asked. "You made them up. I maintained order. Karen yelled back. And now you'll see what happens when there's no one watching. Your property values will plummet, your neighborhood will turn into a slum, and it will all be his fault. She pointed at me with a shaking finger. The neighbors were all staring at Karen in shock. Her mask of friendly authority had completely fallen away, revealing someone who was desperate, controlling, and completely out of touch with reality. But I wasn't finished yet. Karen, I said calmly, there's something else everyone should know. I pulled out the county records I had researched. Your house has been in foreclosure proceedings for 6 months. Is it possible that your financial stress has been affecting your behavior toward your neighbors? Karen's eyes went wide with panic and fury. How dare you dig into my private business? It's public record, I said simply. Just like the code violations on your property that you never addressed while you were busy harassing everyone else about fake violations. The crowd was silent as the full scope of Karen's hypocrisy became clear. She had been terrorizing the neighborhood about property maintenance while her own house was falling apart and facing foreclosure. Mrs. Peterson shook her head sadly. Karen, if you were having financial problems, we would have helped you. This neighborhood has always supported each other during difficult times. But you chose to take your stress out on everyone else. That's when Karen completely lost it. I don't need your help, she screamed. I don't need anyone. I've been taking care of this neighborhood for years, and this is how you repay me. By siding with him. She pointed at me again. You destroyed our garden, I said firmly. You terrorized my 8-year-old daughter. You filed false complaints and wasted the time of county officials. And you did it all while pretending to have authority you never had. Karen looked around at all the neighbors, seeing nothing but disappointment and anger in their faces. The community she thought she had been protecting had turned against her. Without another word, she spun around and marched back to her house, slamming the door behind her. The next morning, I woke up to the most beautiful sight I had seen in months. Karen's house had a "for sale" sign in the front yard. Over the next few weeks, Karen barely came outside. When she did, she avoided eye contact with everyone and hurried back inside as quickly as possible. The neighborhood returned to peaceful quiet, with kids playing on sidewalks and families enjoying their properties without fear of harassment. Mrs. Peterson stopped by one evening with a plate of cookies and an apology. We're so sorry about what you went through, she said. We all thought Karen had real authority. If we had known she was just making things up, we would have stopped it months ago. It's not your fault, I told her. Karen was very convincing. She had official-looking documents and seemed to know all the rules. Well, the important thing is that it's over now, Mrs. Peterson said. And I have to say, that trash can alarm was brilliant. When we heard it going off and saw Karen standing there looking guilty, we all knew something wasn't right. A month later, Karen's house sold to a lovely young couple with twin toddlers. They introduced themselves to everyone on the street and seemed genuinely excited to be part of the community. As for our family, we finally felt like we could enjoy our home again. Emma went back to drawing with chalk on our driveway, Sarah replanted her flower garden, which grew back more beautiful than before, and I returned my trash can to normal, though I kept the security cameras, just in case. The best part was that the whole experience brought our neighborhood closer together. Without Karen's fake authority creating division, we started having block parties and neighborhood get-togethers. We formed a real community watch program and established actual, reasonable guidelines for maintaining our properties. Looking back, I realized that Karen's harassment had actually done something positive. It had united the neighborhood against bullying and fake authority. We all learned the importance of questioning people who claim to have power over us, and we became better neighbors to each other. As for my special trash can revenge, it became legendary in our neighborhood. Every time someone new moved in, they would eventually hear the story of how a motion-activated alarm brought down the neighborhood's fake HOA dictator. And sometimes, late at night when I'm taking out the trash, I smile remembering the look on Karen's face when that alarm went off and her whole world of fake authority came crashing down around her. The moral of the story? Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's exposing the truth and letting justice take its course. Karen's own actions brought about her downfall. All I did was install a trash can alarm and document the facts. But most importantly, never let someone bully you or your family, even if they claim to have official authority. Always question, always research, and always stand up for what's right. Because sometimes the person making the most noise about rules and authority is the one breaking the most rules of all. If you enjoyed this story about standing up to HOA harassment and getting the perfect revenge, make sure you're subscribed for more incredible stories about neighbors, justice, and karma coming back around. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.